Nice, going live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, YouTubers. This is Jerry Diamond with How to Get Out of Babylon. We're reading through the series of books, the Spirit Flyer series, and I'm on the second book, The Toy Campaign. Last night I started the third book thinking it was the second book, so I read chapter one of that, so we'll come back to that later and read it again. so, um, so the last book ended with, I don't even remember, but we'll figure it out, right? Yeah. Okay. This thing's been creased really bad. When the toy store closed, chapter 1. Some children wish for toys all their lives, thinking that toys hold a secret magic treasure. The search for the perfect toy may take them into many worlds, but when their journey enters the deeper world, they may be surprised at what they find. One summer there was a town full of children who wished for toys and toys and more toys, and one day their wishes seemed to be coming true. Something unusual was going on in the toy store for that summer, but no one knew what it was until it was almost too late. The toy store in Centerville had closed suddenly. Almost every child around was puzzled because it was the third week of summer vacation. And somehow it just didn't seem right that the only toy store in town was closed for so long. A sign in the window spelled out the bad news. Closed until further notice. Big black curtains had been placed across the front windows inside the entire store. Parents had been calling Mr. Potter, the owner of the toy store, but Mr. Potter was never at home. His house seemed as empty as the toy store. Each day, several children in the town would walk or ride their bicycles to the store. The children would press their faces against the big black windows, hoping to see some sign of activity beyond the heavy black curtains, but for 2 weeks they saw nothing. Susan Kramer, oh man, I forgot to adjust the picture on this thing. Sorry about that. Let's see if I can. Improvise, adapt, and overcome. What branch of the military is that the motto for? The Marine Corps. Okay, there we go. All right, so Susan Kramer was curious at the closing of the toy store, but not as curious as her cousin John. John Kramer made a daily trip to the store because he had a secret reason for wanting to know what was going on. If you remember, he put the gear shift lever on early, pushed it. He was up in the air, he pushed it, and he disappeared. Poof! And then he came back 3 hours later. And Grandfather Kramer said he put it on wrong. He shouldn't have rushed. He told him not to put it on, but he was antsy to get it, see what it did, and he found out what it did. But he had not told anybody up until this point in time. John made a daily trip to the store because he had a secret reason for wanting to know what was going on. No one thought it unusual that he would stop by there each day, since so many other children did the same thing. But Susan noticed John's frequent trips. She had been worried about her cousin for several days. For 3 weeks he had been acting odd, though the changes in his behavior were hard to explain. He would go through moods up and down like a bouncing basketball. Manic depressive? Bipolar manic depressive? He'd go through moods up and down like a bouncing basketball. One minute he would be happy and goofing off. The next minute he would fall into a quiet mood, seeming depressed and worried. When John was feeling good, his self-confidence was often annoying to Susan because he acted like a know-it-all. And when he was down, he was sometimes irritable. The two cousins had lived together ever since John was small when his parents disappeared in a storm. But now Susan didn't think she knew him anymore, nor could she figure out why he was so interested in the toy store. Susan and John usually got along pretty well, even though only a year separated them. They had formed a lawn mowing business together, but that summer, and had started to make good money. But John's brooding about the toy store and sudden mood changes got on Susan's nerves. She was a careful worker and did most of the trimming and clipping. For the past week he had been more careless than ever. When he was happy, he rushed too much and did a poor job cutting the grass. When he was in a bad mood, he took forever to finish even the simplest task. Susan felt as if she were doing her job and half of John's job too. On a Monday morning, the last day of June, she planned to tell John to shape up, or she was going to get another partner. She figured she would give him until Friday, July the 4th, to change or else. But before she got a chance to tell him, John told her his plan to unlock the Toy Store mystery. And that's how the whole adventure started. All I want to do is look in that little window that's in the alley behind the store, John told Susan. He seemed eager and confident, but at the same time Susan felt as if he were holding back or hiding something. Susan was in the garage putting oil on the chain of her new bicycle, which was really an old red bicycle. 5 other old red bicycles were parked in the garage. though each one was slightly different in size and shape. They all had same name painted in noble white letters on the side, Spirit Flyer. But why do you need to go? Why do you need me to go to the toy store? Susan asked. I just want someone to be there, John said. Someone with a Spirit Flyer. That's why I'm not asking Roger. Since John didn't want to ask Roger, his best friend, Susan knew John must be serious about wanting her to go along. So she was glad. So she was glad. Okay, here's a picture of her holding her chain and him trying to convince her to go. Hey, Zepton, how you doing there, buddy? Yeah, we're in the right book now. Sorry about yesterday. That meant that he trusted her. John had a bad habit of jumping into things carelessly. Her mother called John impulsive. It sounds rather impulsive to me, Susan said, trying to sound like her mother. And it seems awful snoopy, like it's not quite legal. Why do you have to be so serious and sensible all the time? John complained. Not complaining, just explaining. Or my wife always said, not explaining, just complaining, which she's very good at. I just don't want to do something dumb or wrong, Susan said defensively. Besides, what does the toy store have to do with our Spirit Flyers? I'm not sure yet, John said. I just thought you'd understand more, because you know about Spirit Flyers and about the deeper world, and about the time I disappeared. Susan looked up. Almost 3 weeks earlier, the day before the toy store had closed, John Kramer had impatiently hooked up a gear lever to his Spirit Flyer bike without getting help. Now John knew Spirit Flyer bikes were magic, but even he wasn't prepared for what happened when he pressed the gear lever that was hooked up the wrong way. He disappeared right before his family's eyes into thin air, and he didn't return until 3 hours later. And when he came back, his t-shirt and jeans were torn and dirty and covered with dirty black powder that looked and smelled like soot or ashes. John had not said much about his mysterious adventure. He claimed he couldn't remember where he went or what had happened. But Susan wondered if that was true. She thought something had happened on that strange trip that had made the 11-year-old boy afraid. When John returned from that secret journey, he immediately took the gear lever off his bike. The boy refused to touch it, or the horn, or the mirror, or the other old bicycle accessories which he had removed when he first found it at the dump. What does the toy store have to do with the deeper world and you disappearing? Susan asked. Probably nothing, John replied, but then again, who knows? John stared at Susan stared at John. Susan stared at John. He seemed fidgety and nervous. She was certain he was holding back something. Why don't you tell us what happened when you disappeared? Susan asked in a soft voice. And why don't you let me help you hook up the instruments to your Spirit Flyer? Grandfather Kramer told us your accessories hook up exactly the same way they are attached to our Spirit Flyers. I wish Grandfather didn't have to go on that trip to see Aunt Thelma, John said. People get sick at the worst times. It's not fair. Great Aunt Thelma couldn't help it, Susan said. Besides, Grandpa had told us it would be all right and that you should put the instruments back on because the Spirit Flyer isn't really complete without them. He said it was very important. I don't care if it's complete or important, John said irritably. His happy mood suddenly snapped and the boy looked worried. Susan sighed. She had tried several different times to convince John that he should put the gear lever and the other instruments back on. The boy hardly seemed to trust the old red bike anymore, Susan thought to herself. We don't really know what all those instruments do, John complained. Besides, it works well enough for me without the instruments. I've done okay, haven't I? I mean, after all, I saved the day when I caught those 2 thieves who stole all the bicycles in town, didn't I? I made the front page of the Centerville Times that week, if you remember. You've only reminded us 1,000 times over the last 3 weeks, Susan groaned. John was suddenly confident again and irritating in a different way. The town had treated him like a hero, but the praise had only gone to the boy's head. John acted like he had practically saved the whole town and half the county, too. Susan thought any kind of bragging was annoying, and this was especially irritating since it was John's magic bicycle, the Spirit Flyer, which really was responsible for catching the thieves. John was merely along for the ride, Susan thought. She had to admit that she was somewhat jealous of all the attention John had received. But even so, John's bragging was still inexcusable. I'm not saying your Spirit Flyer isn't wonderful the way it is right now, Susan said slowly, but it does seem like you're limiting the bike when you don't put on the accessories. I know, John said impatiently. Why do you keep bugging me? I had all I needed when I caught those bicycle thieves, didn't I? Well, I'm not going to argue with you about that, Susan said as she put the old can and rags away. She shrugged her shoulders. Grandfather said everyone learns at their own pace, and you've been warned. You should at least read some in the Book of the Kings Grandfather gave us. There's all sorts of neat stories and things in there about the deeper world and the 3 kings and the Spirit Flyers. Have you read the whole book? John demanded. Not yet, Susan admitted. but I'm reading a little at a time, and it's really neat. Some parts are hard to understand, but a lot of the book is just as. I just don't feel like reading it, that's all, John interrupted. The mere size of the book discouraged John, and in those days, right after being a hero for catching the bicycle thieves, he thought he already knew more than enough about the spirit flyers and the things of the deeper world. Will you help me look in the toy store window or not? John asked impatiently. I'll go along, but I don't know how much I'll help, Susan said. If you think that the toy store has something to do with the deeper world and spirit flyers, maybe you should tell Dad. There's nothing to tell yet, John said. Besides, if there really is something deeper going on, he probably wouldn't want me to investigate at all. You know how he is. He seems almost afraid to ride his spirit flyer. Well, they aren't ordinary bicycles, Susan said and smiled. 16. She had been supremely happy ever since the day the spirit flyer had come to her family. Flyers had come to her family. During the 3 hours John had disappeared, the old red bicycle simply appeared in the Kramer's garage, like gifts waiting under a Christmas tree. Yeah, Christmas tree. Christmas. The bikes were indeed very special gifts from the three kings, yet spirit flyers were more than just bicycles. They were a sign that each owner belonged to the kingdom of the kings. Susan did not know how she had ever lived without her spirit flyer. Even though she had ridden it for just a few weeks, the old red bike seemed like a close friend. Each ride made her feel like she was about to start a new adventure. Perhaps it was because the bikes were so mysterious and so powerful that Susan's parents had both been hesitant to ride them as often as their children. Mr. Kramer was especially cautious about riding his old red bicycle. Because of John's disappearance, Mr. Kramer didn't want anyone to use the gear levers on the spirit flyers until they understood more about them. He had read some in the Book of Kings about spirit flyers, but as sheriff for the town of Centerville, he often felt too busy or too tired to read about the ways and gifts of the kings. Susan and her sisters had sadly agreed not to use the gear levers for the time being, and John didn't have to agree since he'd already taken the gear lever off his bike. Even if spirit flyers aren't ordinary bicycles, I don't think we should be afraid of them the way Dad seems to be, Susan said. I think he thinks something might happen that we can't control. Well, you never know what will happen for sure when you ride a spirit flyer, John said, speaking from experience. You can't control them like a regular bike. But as long as you hold on, they're safe, Susan said. That's what Grandfather Kramer told us. Even though you disappeared, you got back okay. Sure, John said, not too confidently. But I don't want to talk about that again. Let's go down to the toy store before it gets too hot. Okay, Susan said and sighed. She felt like she was going against her better judgment. But deep inside John's talk and behavior made her wonder if something unusual was happening at the toy store. She decided she would want to wait to speak to him about doing his share of the work in the lawn mowing business. She hoped that if he felt more settled about the toy store, then maybe he would get his mind back on work. As Susan lifted out the garage door, the uneasy feeling inside made her pause. Maybe I am too serious about things, Susan argued with herself, but then why do I feel as if we're about to get into some kind of trouble? She pushed her heavy old spirit flyer out into the bright June sunlight and hopped on. She rolled down the driveway and turned toward the downtown section of Centerville. John followed her, pedaling fast to catch up. Rolling along, the big balloon tires sang over the street as the cool cool Monday morning breeze washed their faces, but even that refreshing breeze couldn't wash away the nagging doubts that Susan felt. She gripped the handlebars of the old red bicycle harder and hoped she wasn't making a big mistake. Probably is, right? Yeah. Okay. Anybody got anything to say? Good night. I didn't get last night till that porn stuff. Shoot, I gotta do that. All right, good night, Zapton. You glad we're on the right book now? Sorry about confusing you. I'm totally confused. Yeah, I was more totally confused than you were totally confused. All right, good night. God bless. God bless your grandchildren and children and grandchildren. Let's talk about that sometime. I've got 5 children and about 18, 19 grandchildren. I don't know last count. How many you got? How many kids and children you got, buddy? Let me know. All right, good night. God bless. Bye-bye.